sorry for you all because you've just heard our voice all morning, but you can have a break soon. All right, so what we thought we would do in this session is a little bit of an unpacking of some of the things that we talked about this morning, and how we do it in a practical way. And then hopefully we'll get a few minutes at the end for some Q&A. So if you do have any questions, start writing them down so that you're ready and we can do that, because we don't have a huge amount of time.
And it may even be questions coming out of the previous, like the marriage session as well, if that's applicable too. So.
Yeah. All right, so what we're going to do is this morning when I did the parenting kind of session about home, we're going to unpack each one of those things and how we came to some of the decisions that we made and how we implemented some of those things in our family at different ages. So the first one, and just to set this up, we are not talking about perfect homes. We definitely do not have a perfect home, but the goal is to have a healthy home. And so if you're constantly committed to health, then your standards are going to be very different. Your pressure on you is going to be very different. There is definitely a saying that talks about mummy guilt, and there's also daddy guilt. It's a real thing, and I think all of us at some stage have felt it, because we're imperfect. And so we're imperfect, trying to parent imperfect people in a way that the society tells us we need to be perfect to do. But if we just aim at being as healthy as we possibly can, then these things can come into place. So the first thing we're going to talk about is our foundation, which is who we are. And that's our culture and our values. And as we've said a few times already, we came from very, very different upbringings. My parents divorced, they remarried. It was an unstable environment. The way they did conflict wasn't good. Even spiritually, it was an unstable environment for a lot of years where one was a Christian, one wasn't. So there were a lot of elements to that. And then Artie, you can talk about.
Well, my family, my parents got radically saved when I was 3 years old, and so that's what I grew up in. Now they're far from perfect in their marriage, but they would work stuff out, and we would see them work stuff out, and they had an absolute, just never-ending commitment to each other. We're gonna make this. Divorce is not an option for us. We're gonna figure this out, and God's gonna get us through. And the way that they parented us, and the way that they were committed to us as their children, how sacrificial they were, what they gave up to be able to provide for us and to do the things that they felt were important for us as a family, was just quite remarkable. And so it was just these two different environments that we came from that we then had to work out, okay, how are we going to do this, and how are we going to parent? How are we going to raise our kids?
So we talked a lot about it and talked about what was really important to us. Obviously, the first thing that's the easiest port of call is the Word of God. And so we wanted to raise our kids in an environment where they knew the Word of God, that we're a Christian household, so there's certain things that we do and don't do because of that. We're unapologetic about that. We go to church on Sundays as a family. You go to youth. It's not an option. And you go to Connect Group, which is RDG for our kids. They have their own Connect Groups. That's not an option. Now, some of those things cost us personally, as we said before. So when we're talking about culture and values, we're not just talking about fitting them into whatever spare time you have or whatever spare energy you have or whatever's going on in your life. Your life rotates around these things. So for our kids, they know that they wouldn't even ask for certain things because it would be a no. They don't even bother asking. They know that there's an expectation on them that they're going to do certain things, be certain places, not have certain things. And for us personally, it cost us. It's cost us our time, our energy. There were nights in the week where I was sitting in a car, probably 4 nights out of the week for 3 or 4 hour slots just to make things work for the kids, because it was in line with our culture and values. And so I guess in saying that, it's for you to think about what are the things that are really, really important to us, and what are we going to do to revolve our life around those things. For us, it's being in church every weekend, and so it's just never even an option for us to choose to do other things. And so over time, because when we were first married, our families would put functions on those days, and over time of them realizing that we just literally can't be there if you're going to do that on a Sunday. Now, if it's a one-off thing and it's a major thing, of course. But when it's just a barbecue for the sake of getting together and having a barbecue, we'll show up when we can, but we didn't then go, oh yeah, okay, well, we'll be at that, we won't be here. Oh, okay, we'll do this, we won't do that. Because that becomes really confusing for your children. And that's where your culture and values get watered down, because they're like, well, hang on a minute, you said that we're committed to church, but then when you'd rather go to a barbecue, we're kind of not committed to church anymore, we're committed to the barbecue. Oh, but then when you're tired and you don't want to drive us to RDG, then RDG doesn't matter anymore. But then when, you know what I mean, like it's very confusing for them.
And working out some of the basic things on how our family is going to operate. You know, we spoke before about meal times and so on. And when our kids were younger, it was, they were all in the home a lot more. And so mealtime was everybody at the table. It's everyone put your phones away, us included, me included. And when we were first married, I did. I erred on the side of being much more focused on work and ministry and all that sort of thing, and had to realize that I was actually putting that ahead of marriage and family most of the time in a way that was unhealthy. And I spoke about that balance before. The balance was tipped continually in favor of work and ministry. And so I'd come home, I'd be on the phone, and we got little kids at that stage. And so, you come in the door and the kids are so excited, Dad's home. You know what little kids are like. And so they're wanting my attention, and I'm still trying to work out, sort out a big event we've got coming up, and working through all that, or dealing with a person or whatever it might have been. And it's just not helpful. It's not creating the kind of environment that we want. And so, either I just had to get more disciplined in cutting off the phone call, or I wouldn't step into the house until I'd been able to, if it was something that was urgent and couldn't just be cut off, deal with that before I step into the house, rather than having, kids coming ready for Dad's home or Dad's on the phone again. And it was probably a little bit of a wake-up call when I saw, I forget which one of our children it was saying, I'm Dad, and was literally walking around like talking on a phone. Just like, I was like, wow, okay, I do that way too much. Just a little bit of an awareness. And so working out, okay, how are we going to do this? And so for our kids, every now and then you'd be at the dinner table, and one of them would be on their phone, like, what are you doing? And the kids would regulate each other. Why have you got your phone here? Oh, I'm just replying to this. No, it can wait. It can wait till after dinner. We're talking. We're catching up. There's actually some research that's been done with the change to away from regular TV stations to streaming services, and everyone having their own devices and their own accounts and all that sort of thing. Some of the disconnect that's happened in breaking down communal feeling between either in families or even in workplaces, because everyone used to watch the same shows. You didn't have any other options, did you? At most, you had maybe 4 or 5 channels. Everyone used to watch the same things, and so you would talk about the same things. And in a family, the family would sit down. If they're going to watch TV, they would watch the same show. Well, now everyone's off watching their own things with their own particular preferences and so on. And there's actually some social research that's been done to show that the disconnect that's happening amongst people because they don't have these same shared common things anymore. So one thing that we do as a family, as part of this building who we are, is we talk with our kids. We're like, okay, let's watch something together. What do you want to watch? and they'll all work out together. And it's not, I want to watch this, and I don't like that. So we work out, what are we going to watch together? And it might be a series or something, but it's something that's shared and common, if that makes. And it's a silly example, but it makes a point. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's also got to be give and take in that too, and that's also a really good skill to instill in your kids. So building on that, where we talked about boundaries and putting the walls and the parameters up.
So before you go on, working out who you are and what's important to you, your values. One thing that I learned from Alana, my family wasn't big on celebrating things. Or if we did celebrate, we'd celebrate someone's achievement, or if you did well at something, or whatever it might have been. There'd be some sort of acknowledgement of it, but it wasn't a big deal. And in your family, I think things weren't really celebrated at all. So that was one thing. Alana was like, I want to be the type of family that celebrates. And if someone has a win or something, you have a breakthrough or something good happens or whatever it might, we're going to celebrate everything. And so that's become part of who we are. We celebrate stuff, and we go all out and celebrate. And it's silly things. We might put streamers up around the house, and we'll put all different things, whatever it is, and we celebrate the smallest things. And it took me a little bit of time to adjust to, but it's become something that our family does. It's important to us, and the big moments are important. Christmas and different things, but the small things as well. And so anything that happens, we celebrate it. We celebrate the life out of that, because we want that to be something that marks the culture of our family.
Yeah, because again, it's that positive reinforcement of you've worked hard, you've earned this, and we're celebrating that, and not just going to keep going with life and overlook it. So we're going to talk about boundaries. And this is a really big topic, and it can be, we can't sort of go through every scenario and this is how to set a boundary on that. But big picture, when we're setting boundaries, again, often it will come at our own personal cost. And we've got to be okay with that. So it can't be that 1 minute that boundary exists because I want it to and it suits me and this is what we're doing today. And then tomorrow I'm tired, I can't be bothered, I don't want to have to deal with that, I can't. Then that reinforces an inconsistency in boundaries, and young children will find those gaps very quickly. They've got a radar for them. It's so important to be consistent and to understand this will cost me. And if it's important enough to you because it aligns with your culture and value, then you're going to do it. And the easiest way to do it, like we've just talked about, is by positive reinforcement. So whatever you've decided your culture and values are, so for us, obviously it's connectedness. And so every night it was the dinner table. And sometimes it became hard for me. It became a bit of a chore. I'd be at work all day. I'd have to come home and cook dinner. We'd have to set the table. We'd have to sit there and talk. And majority of the time I loved it. Sometimes I was like, I am so tired. I just wish we could just, veg out. But you're constantly being brought back to, I need to do this because I need to reinforce again that this is who we are and this is the positive reinforcement that we need to see. And then when kids break those boundaries, it's really easy for yourself to get triggered when your children do things. I know for me, there have been times when our kids have done something and I've had to discipline them, and I've actually felt really guilty. I felt like, did I drop the ball here? What have I done that's made them think that that was okay? Or what if other people hear about this? I'm going to be so embarrassed. Or this is triggered in me because I'm thinking, what on earth are you doing? And so we've got to kind of remove some of those emotions out of out of boundary setting or boundary keeping, and be able to look at everything objectively. Your kids are going to tell you things that are going to shock you. I promise you, it'll shock you. And so we've got to kind of decide, I'm going to be unflappable. I'm going to be okay with whatever they come to me with, because your initial reaction might be, what? What were you thinking? How could you even think that's okay? But it's like, okay, I'm going to be poker face on, because we need them to know in those moments we love them, we accept them, we have grace for them. Sure, there's going to be consequence. Our kids know there's always going to be consequence, because that's what they know is one of our values. But they need to know, above all of that, outside of the actual behavior, we love them, we're gracious toward them, we're forgiving. And those things happen in that first second of them telling you something. And so we've had situations where we've had to deal with a certain thing. We've talked it through. We've talked about, why did you think that that was okay? What led you to that decision? What made you feel like that? And try and get to the understanding of why would you have even agreed to that? Maybe there's some sort of, I need to feel accepted, I need to feel connected, I felt left out, I felt whatever it could be. Because often when you're looking at behavior, you're not just looking at the behavior, you're looking at a whole layer of stuff that's happening underneath. And so understanding that for them, and then being able to correct it and bring correction. And so do they need to take responsibility for it? One thing that we will just not even tolerate, and this comes back to our culture and values, is you don't make excuses for things. If you've done the wrong thing, you admit it and you take responsibility for it. And it comes back to that victim mentality. We're not building a victim mentality in our kids where it's everyone else's fault. They told me to do it, so I did it. That teacher was rude to me, so I was rude back. That, whatever it is. No. You chose your behavior, and so you now need to take responsibility for it. And if that means apologizing, if that means making it right, if that means fixing whatever it is, you are going to do that. And that's hard. It's really hard. Because you, as a parent, you want to fix things for your kids. We're wired to do that. But you have to allow them to take responsibility, because that builds resilience in them.
It's like there's a cliche, and most cliches become cliches because they're true. The way that we see God, how we relate to God, really plays out a lot in the way that we parent. There's real similarities in it. So there's a nice cliche that goes around, someone saying, I've totally messed up, my dad's going to kill me. Whereas the other, that's an unhealthy relationship with God, or with a parent. The other one is, the healthy side of that is, I've totally messed up, I need to tell my dad. Now, that doesn't just happen. You got to create an environment and an atmosphere that encourages that. Where, Alana's talked already this morning about that emotional safety, where there's these boundaries, yes, there's expectations, and yes, there's consequences. But if we create an environment where if you mess up, where are you going to go? Let's talk about it, and the way that we're going to deal with that is going to be in a way that, yes, there'll be consequences, but there's also going to be healing and restoration, and we're going to find a way through. The other thing with boundaries is that if you're a couple, you've got to be on the same page together with those, and you've got to back each other up. The kids know how to play parents off against each other. If they think one's the weak link and the other one's, I can get what I want out of them and so on, we've got to be on the same page. And so sometimes our response, the kids would, especially again when they were younger, they might ask for something. And so our first response would be, I'd say, what did mum say? Or what did dad say? Because have you gone and got the answer you didn't want from them and now you're coming to me? And there would be times when, one of us might be setting a boundary for something. or dealing with something, so, there might be a consequence or you're disciplining or something, and one or the other of us might have thought, oh, that's probably not how I would have dealt with that. And there were times when, we might say, well, no, don't do that. And that's the worst thing you can do. And so you just zip it, you put up with it, you back each other up, and then maybe afterwards you might talk about, do you think that was probably the best way to deal with that or not? And so we make adjustments. But in the moment, in front of the kids, you've got to back each other.
And, there are times when our kids will talk to one of us and not the other. And it's not so much because they're trying to play us off against each other. They do that. But it's sometimes just the topic or the way that they're feeling really vulnerable. They will feel more comfortable with that. And so then I will say to them, are you okay with me telling Dad this? Because they know that we talk about everything. Our house is very, very open. We talk about everything. And so I will say to them, are you okay if I tell this to Dad? And often they'll be okay with it because they couldn't do it themselves, but they want him to know. And so the reason that they're okay with that, because we've got 2 girls and 1 boy, and more so with the girls, because he's built that connection with them. And that doesn't just happen by driving them places and hanging around them, but he's actually had those hard conversations with them. He's taught them that he loves them, that he's there for them, that there's grace for things with them. And so these things aren't just a reaction to an issue, but you've got to build into, and we're going to go on to emotional safety in a minute, but building into them a sense of that's the kind of people we are. It's not just the way we respond, it's who we are as their parents. And that's kind of, no, I'll save that for the next one.
For those of you, now, if you are separated and you're co-parenting, that whole thing of being on the same page with boundaries and so on can be particularly challenging if you've got 2 very different points of view and you're not maybe able to communicate in the same way. Now, I haven't been in that situation, but having spoken to people, that I guess there can be extra challenges to that. The best thing you can do is to still have that open conversation and to talk with your ex, the parent of your children and so on, to still be able to work out, okay, how are we going to work this out? And having that honest conversation still. There's a whole nother layer of things there that I guess we wouldn't have time to go into, but understanding that, yes, that can be another layer of complexity there. For those of you who have boys, have sons, girls are typically, it's a gross generalization, but typically girls are much more able to, to talk and to discuss how they're feeling about things. Most often boys find that a little harder. One of the best things that you can do is try and have that conversation while you're doing something with him. Doing an activity together, or while you're kicking a ball and you're talking, or you're hitting a cricket ball and you're talking, or as boys get older, around a pool table, or even just going for a drive. One of the best things you can do, in fact, with any male, but with boys, go for a drive when you're not looking into each other's eyes and you're just sort of looking. Guys just find it much easier to talk. That could be great advice for some of the women here. If you want to be able to have a good conversation with your husband and get something out of him, or have the tough conversation, go for a drive and do it. And just, while you're talking, while you're looking out, going somewhere, you might find it a whole lot easier to talk. But, all right.
And even on that, because we'll go on to emotional safety now, one of our daughters, she, I know there's something wrong, and I'll say to her, do you want to talk about it? And she'll say, no, I can't right now. And then within a day or so, she'll text me. And that's actually not a bad thing. Some people would think, oh, that's a bit whatever, texting. But for some people, it's easier for them to write it down and to text it than to actually have that conversation. They feel really vulnerable, really emotional. She's a very literal, very that kind of person. And so for her, that's the way that she communicates. And so I then make sure that I'm on that, I'm responding, I'm okay with that. I know a friend of mine, her son was doing that with her, and she was like, stop texting me and come and talk to me. Like, I think you're defeating the purpose here. So, I guess it's finding ways that you can connect and that you can build that emotional security with your kids that's more about them. This whole thing is not so much about us anymore. Hopefully, as parents, you're a grown, mature person who is then able to put your own feelings and your own preferences aside if it means that they're getting the emotional support that they need. And so with emotional security, again, we've got to look at what works for them. What builds that in them? We've got boys and girls, it's different for each one. But one of the things for me with my son, I just tried to stay as engaged as I could. We would have conversations for hours about Lego, about Ben 10, about Ninjago. Now, I'm not excited about those things, but it was important to him, and it showed him my willingness to be connected to him. It showed engagement. And then it moved on to, as he got older, cricket. Now, I was never a cricket fan, but I learnt the rules of cricket. I learnt the language of cricket, because it is a whole different language, just so that I could talk to him. And again, it took work on my part. It took me being intentional about learning something that mattered to him. And it kept our connection going. It kept our conversation going. And then because I was interested in what he was interested in, he was then interested when I spoke to him. It's always a two-way street. And so if I then had to talk to him about something, he would listen because he'd seen me do the same and give respect to him. And now he's dating and he's probably going to get engaged, and he comes and talks to me about all sorts of things. And it means so much to me. But the other thing I did with him as well, which is really awkward a lot of the time, is I just stayed affectionate with him. Now, boys will go through a stage, and girls actually, when they're teenagers, where it's awkward to hug mum. I made the mistake of doing it on the side of the cricket field once, and I'll never do it again because I saw the absolute fear in his eyes. But staying physically connected, hugging each other, and as sometimes he'd just stand there like this because it was awkward and he didn't know what to do. But as he got older, he would then instigate that connection again. And I think once you stop doing that, it's so much harder to start again. So mums and sons, just don't let it get awkward. Don't let it get, okay, well, you're a boy now, so you're not going to want that. Unless they straight out say to you, Mum, please don't do that, I really don't like it. Obviously, you've got to respect their boundaries. But majority of the time they do like it, they just don't know how to respond.
Because the reality is, how you as a son, how you interact with your mum, and as a daughter, how you interact with your dad, and vice versa, plays out a lot into how you then act in a marriage setting. How you see that modeled and how you see that demonstrated is so vital. And so it is imperative for me as a father of two girls to show them how they should be treated by a male. And so I've got to demonstrate that in how I treat their mum. And, from the little things, I open her car door all the time. And so then to see, my son then doing that for his girlfriend, and my daughter, when she was dating a guy, and she expected that's what he's going to do for her, because that's what you do. And in the way
he
that
didn't understand